On a rainy afternoon, a young designer walks into a bakery, unaware that her life is about to change. There, she meets a frightened little girl who calls her Mommy after a brief gesture of kindness. Days later, the girl's father reappears with an unexpected request to pretend to be his wife for 1 week. What begins as an unlikely arrangement turns into a deep bond that challenges fear, pain, and loneliness. The rain mercilessly lashed Fifth Avenue that March afternoon. Laura Anderson ran along the sidewalks of New York City, her digital portfolio clutched firmly against her chest as she sought shelter from the downpour. The young interior designer spotted the Bella Vista Bakery, a charming establishment with a sea-green facade that promised refuge and, perhaps, a coffee to warm her soul. Upon entering, the aroma of fresh bread and cinnamon enveloped her senses. Laura shook her curly hair, trying to rid herself of the raindrops that insisted on trickling down her face. She chose a table near the window, from where she could admire the rain and work on her new project for an office downtown. Tablet in hand, just a coffee to go with it. She didn't intend to stay long. That's when she noticed. In the corner of the counter, a girl of approximately 6 years old was looking anxiously at the door, as if waiting for someone. Dressed in an impeccable school uniform and a pink backpack with unicorn drawings, the child seemed out of place in that environment. "Excuse me." The attendant approached Laura. "Would you like anything?" "A cappuccino, please," she replied without completely diverting her attention from the little girl. The girl was now talking to the bakery owner, a grey-haired lady. Laura couldn't hear what they were saying, but she noticed that the lady's expression grew increasingly worried. When the attendant brought the cappuccino, Laura couldn't resist. "That girl. Is she alone?" The young attendant looked at the counter and sighed. "That's Julia. Her father always picks her up from school and stops here for a snack before they go home. But today he's taking longer than usual. Mrs. Caroline has already tried calling him, but nothing." Laura thanked her for the information and looked back at the girl, whose eyes were now teary. Without a second thought, she picked up her cappuccino and approached. "May I sit here with you?" she asked with a gentle smile. The girl Julia looked at Laura with curious brown eyes and nodded shyly. "My name is Laura. And yours?" "Julia Miller," the girl replied, holding a half-eaten chocolate truffle. "My dad lets me eat a chocolate truffle while I wait for him." Laura noticed that her tiny hands trembled slightly. "Your dad must be stuck in traffic." "With this rain, New York City gets even more complicated," she commented, trying to reassure the child. Julia lowered her eyes to the chocolate truffle. "He's never late, never." A tear rolled down. "I think he's gone, like Mommy." Laura's heart ached. "What do you mean, Julia?" "Mommy left when I was little. Daddy said she went very far away." The girl took a deep breath, as if trying to control her crying. "Now I think he's gone too." Laura felt a lump in her throat. She took a napkin and gently wiped the girl's tears. "I'm sure he hasn't. Look, I'll stay here with you until your dad arrives, okay? We can talk or draw. Do you like to draw?" Julia's eyes lit up. "I do! Daddy says I draw really well." She opened her backpack and took out a small notebook. "Want to see?" For almost an hour, Laura allowed herself to be drawn into Julia's world. The girl showed her drawings of unicorns, of her house, which looked enormous in her childish strokes, of her cat named Biscuit, and of her father, always depicted as a very tall man in a suit. "My dad works in a place full of music," Julia explained, showing a drawing of a man next to something that looked like a piano. "But he doesn't play anymore. He just watches others play." "Is he a musician?" "I don't know what that is, but he tells everyone what to do there." "People do what he asks." Laura smiled, imagining that the girl's father might be a music producer or something similar. She was about to ask more when the bakery door burst open. A tall, broad-shouldered man, completely drenched, rushed in. His black hair, plastered to his forehead, couldn't hide the expression of pure despair on his face. "Julia." His deep voice echoed through the establishment. "Daddy?" The girl jumped from her chair and ran into the man's arms, who knelt to receive her. Laura watched the scene, relieved. The man hugged his daughter tightly, murmuring apologies as he checked if she was okay. "You didn't leave," Julia whispered, clinging to her father's neck. "Never, princess." "I'll never leave you," he replied, his voice choked. Only then did he seem to notice Laura, who remained seated, observing discreetly. "You were with her?" he asked, standing up while holding his daughter's hand. "We were drawing," Laura replied with a smile. "Julia has a lot of talent." The man finally seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. "I'm Thomas Miller. I apologize for the trouble. My car broke down a few blocks from here. I tried to call a taxi, but with this rain—" He ran a hand through his wet hair, visibly distraught. "I had to run all the way. It was no trouble at all. Julia is great company." Thomas tried to smile, but his expression was one of pure exhaustion. "Even so, thank you." "I don't know how to thank you. Daddy, Laura draws better than you," Julia interrupted, tugging on her father's drenched blazer sleeve. "She makes real houses." "I'm an interior designer," Laura explained. "Interesting," Thomas commented, but his distracted gaze showed that his mind was elsewhere. "We need to go, Julia. Say goodbye to— What's your name again?" Laura Anderson," she replied, feeling strangely disappointed by the man's disinterest. "Bye, Laura." Julia waved animatedly. Thanks for the drawings." Thomas waved briefly, picked up his daughter's backpack and quickly left, still holding the girl's hand. Laura watched the two disappear into the rain, which was now falling more gently. She returned to her original table, pensive. There was something about that girl, a vulnerability combined with strength that deeply touched her. And the father. There was a world of worries behind those intense green eyes. Laura took a deep breath and refocused on her work. After all, she had a deadline to meet, and that brief interlude with Julia, however sweet it had been, was just that, an interlude. A moment outside of normal time that would never be repeated. Little did she know how wrong she was. 3 days later, the doorbell of her apartment in Greenwich Village would ring, bringing back those same green eyes, now no longer desperate, but determined, and with a proposal that would change her life forever. Laura was focused on her latest project when the doorbell rang. The clock showed almost 8 p.m. She wasn't expecting visitors, and delivery people usually announced themselves via intercom. Intrigued, she walked to the door and peeked through the peephole. The image of the man standing in the hallway left her momentarily speechless. Thomas Miller, impeccably dressed in a navy blue suit that drastically contrasted with his disheveled appearance of 3 days prior, waited with his hands in his pockets and a grave expression. "Yes?" Laura asked as she opened the door, not hiding her surprise. "Miss Anderson." Thomas inclined his head slightly. "I apologize for showing up unannounced. I got your address through Mrs. Caroline from the bakery." "Mrs. Caroline? Apparently you left a business card with her. I hope you don't mind my audacity." Laura crossed her arms, trying to process the situation. "Has something happened to Julia?" Her shadow passed through Thomas's eyes. "Actually, it's about her that I've come to talk. May I come in for a few minutes?" The designer hesitated, but her curiosity got the better of her. She stepped away from the door, allowing the man to enter. Laura's apartment, though small, displayed her talent for design. Harmonious color combinations, well-placed furniture, and cozy lighting made the environment welcoming and sophisticated. "Nice place," Thomas commented, visibly more tense than he tried to appear. "Thank you." Laura gestured to the sofa. "Please sit down. Would you like some coffee?" "No, thank you." He sat on the edge of the sofa, as if not intending to stay long. "I'll get straight to the point, Miss Anderson, but Laura, please." "Laura." He took a deep breath. "Ever since that day at the bakery, Julia hasn't stopped talking about you. The pretty lady who draws, as she calls you." An involuntary smile appeared on Laura's face. "She's an adorable child. Yes, she is." Thomas looked away for a moment as if organizing his thoughts. But it's not just that. For the first time in a long time, I saw my daughter connected with someone." The man suddenly stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the illuminated city. "I need to give you some context. I'm the producer and owner of Miller Music, a studio and record label in Soho." "Ah, so that's what Julia meant by place full of music." Thomas almost smiled. "Probably." His expression turned serious again. 3 years ago, my wife Camilla left us. She was a singer at the beginning of her career. We met at the studio and, well, it was fast. We got married. Julia was born." He paused, visibly uncomfortable. "Camilla discovered she wasn't ready to be a mother or a wife. When Julia turned 3, she simply left. She left a letter saying she needed to follow her dream, that there was no room for a family. "I'm so sorry," Laura murmured, genuinely touched. "Since then, I've been both father and mother to Julia, and I thought we were doing well as could be expected." Thomas sat down again. "Until recently, she started asking questions about her mother. Why she didn't have one like the other children at school. If her mother had left, because she didn't like her." Laura felt a tightness in her chest. "And then next Saturday is Julia's birthday. 7 years old." He smiled sadly. "I planned a party, invited her friends, hired entertainers, and yesterday Julia told me she doesn't want any party. That she only wants one thing as a gift." "What?" Laura asked, already intuiting the answer. "You, Laura." Thomas's green eyes met hers. "She wants you to come to the party. In fact, she's convinced that you are her mother." "What?" Laura stood up, perplexed. "But that doesn't make sense. I only met her for an hour. Believe me, I'm as surprised as you are." Thomas rubbed his face, tired. "But Julia is convinced. After that day, she started saying that her mother had come back, that you hadn't gone far away like I had said, that you had just forgotten her for a while." Laura walked around the room trying to process the absurdity of the situation. "Thomas, as much as I adored meeting your daughter, this is complicated. I can't pretend to be someone I'm not." I know." He stood up. "That's why I came in person, to explain the situation and ask—" Thomas hesitated, as if the following words were difficult to pronounce. "To ask for your help." "My help?" "I need you to come to the party, to talk to Julia. Perhaps if she sees you again in a different context, she'll realize that you're not, well, her mother." Laura crossed her arms, considering. "I understand your concern, but wouldn't it be better to explain the truth to her?" "I tried." Thomas's voice faltered. "She cried so much she couldn't breathe. I had to take her to the hospital. The doctor said it was an anxiety attack." A heavy silence fell over the room. Laura sat down again, trying to imagine the suffering of that child. "I'm not asking you to pretend to be her mother," Thomas continued, "just to come to the party, talk to her. Afterwards, gradually, we'll explain the situation." Laura nodded slowly. "All right, I can do that." Thomas's face lit up with relief. "Thank you very much, But," Laura interrupted, "I need you to understand that it will only be a visit. I don't want to create more expectations for her." Of course." Thomas took a card from his pocket. "Here's my number and the address. The party starts at 3 p.m. Laura took the card, still unsure if she was doing the right thing. "I'll be there." When Thomas left, Laura remained on the sofa for a long time, contemplating the card in her hands. Something told her that this story wouldn't end as easily as it had begun. On Saturday, promptly at 3 p.m., Laura arrived at the indicated address, an imposing house on the Upper East Side, with tall gates and a meticulously cared-for garden. In her hands, she held a colourful package containing a professional drawing kit, adapted for children. Upon ringing the doorbell, she was greeted by a middle-aged lady who scrutinized her with curiosity. "You must be Miss Anderson. I'm Regina, the housekeeper. Mr. Miller is by the pool area with the guests. Please, follow me." As she followed Regina through the elegantly decorated corridors of the house, Laura couldn't help but admire the architecture. Expensive paintings, designer furniture, all tastefully chosen, though it lacked a more welcoming touch. The outdoor area was even more impressive. An infinity pool dominated the space, surrounded by loungers and tables. Children ran and played, under the supervision of monitors dressed as children's characters. In one corner, a lavish table of sweets and savories, and in the center a 3-tiered cake decorated with a unicorn theme. Laura spotted Thomas talking to some adults, probably parents of other children. When their eyes met, he immediately excused himself from the group and came towards her. "You came," he said with evident relief in his voice. "I said I would." Laura smiled, extending the gift. "For Julia." Before Thomas could reply, a sharp cry cut through the air. "Mommy!" Julia ran towards her, her eyes sparkling with joy, a smile so radiant it lit up her entire little face. Laura froze, unsure how to react. She glanced quickly at Thomas, who seemed as stunned as she was. The girl threw herself into her arms, hugging her tightly. "You came back. I knew it. I knew you'd come back for my birthday." Laura felt the world spin. What should she do? Contradict the child in front of everyone? Feed an illusion that would only make things worse? That's when Thomas knelt beside them, placing a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Julia, remember what we talked about? Laura came to your party because she's my mum and she loves me," the girl completed with a conviction that left the adults speechless. Nearby, guests watched the scene with curiosity. Some whispered among themselves, clearly confused by what they were witnessing. Thomas cast a pleading look at Laura, and at that moment, seeing the happiness in Julia's eyes, she made a decision that would change the course of their lives. "I'm happy to be here for your birthday, Julia," she said, stroking the girl's hair. It wasn't a confirmation, but it wasn't a denial either. Julia smiled even wider and tugged on her hand. "Come see my friends, Mommy. I want to show you everything." As she was dragged away by the enthusiastic child, Laura exchanged one last look with Thomas. A look that communicated far more than words could express. That birthday visit had just transformed into something far more complex, and the consequences of that moment neither of them could foresee. Julia's birthday party had ended hours ago, but Laura still remained at the Miller's house, sitting in the living room before a visibly distraught Thomas. The silence between them was broken only by the ticking of the wall clock and the distant sounds of Regina tidying up the kitchen. "I'm sorry," Thomas finally said, pouring himself another finger of whiskey. "I never imagined she would react that way." Laura sighed, still processing the afternoon's events. Julia had practically refused to leave her side throughout the entire party, introducing her to everyone as her mother. The situation became even more complicated when the girl insisted that Laura stay to open presents, sing happy birthday, and later to read a story before bed. "So I don't know how to deal with this, Thomas. I can't just go into her room now and tell her I'm not her mother. It would be traumatic." "I know." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Laura had already noticed was typical when he was anxious. "This is entirely my fault." "What do you mean?" Thomas placed the glass on the coffee table and settled back on the sofa. Julia always asked about her mother. At first I tried to explain that Camilla had left, but— "How do you explain?" "Abandonment to a 3-year-old?" His voice trembled slightly. "So I started making up stories. That her mother was traveling, working far away, but that one day she would come back. That's why she's convinced I'm her mother who came back," Laura concluded. "Why didn't you try to tell her the truth as she grew up?" "I tried, a few months ago." Thomas looked at the ceiling, as if reliving the memory. "I told her her mother wouldn't come back, that she had made a choice. And that's when the nightmares, the anxiety started." Julia began drawing female figures in all her drawings, creating an imaginary version of the mother she never knew. Laura stood up and walked to the large window overlooking the garden, now lit only by the pool lights. "And then she found me at the bakery." Exactly. A kind woman who draws like her, who listened to her. For Julia, all the pieces fit. You were the mother who finally came back. Silence once again dominated the room, heavy with the implications of what had happened. "So now what?" Laura finally asked. "What do we do?" Thomas looked at her with an expression that blended despair and determination. "I have a proposal. It's unconventional. You'll probably think it's crazy, but—" He took a deep breath. "I need you to pretend to be Julia's mother, for a week." "What?" Laura's eyes widened. "That's absurd." I know. He stood up, approaching her. "But think about it. 1 week. Enough time for Julia to have the birthday experience she so longed for, and also for us to gradually prepare her for the truth. Thomas, this isn't healthy. For either of us. Believe me, I've considered all alternatives." His voice was low, almost a whisper. "I consulted her psychologist without mentioning you, of course. She suggested not to confront Julia's fantasy abruptly, but to work with it gradually." Laura crossed her arms, incredulous. And your solution is to turn me into her mother for a week. How is that working gradually? Because at the end of this week we can explain it together. You as a friend who came to help, not as the mother who abandoned her. Do you understand the difference? Laura shook her head negatively, sitting down again. This is crazy, Thomas. I have my life, my projects. I can't just move into your house and pretend to be someone I'm not. I would pay you, of course. He hastened to say, consider it a job, the most important project of your career, helping a child deal with abandonment. It's not about money. Laura raised her voice, frustrated. We're talking about lying to a child. We're talking about protecting a child, Thomas corrected, sitting beside her. Please, Laura. I'm just asking for 1 week. After that, I promise we'll find a way to explain everything to her together. Laura closed her eyes, trying to organize her thoughts. Everything seemed so absurd, so improbable. And yet, the image of Julia running to her, calling her mommy with such certainty and joy flooded her mind. That girl had already suffered abandonment. How would she react if Laura simply disappeared from her life now? 1 week, she repeated, opening her eyes to face Thomas. With a few conditions. The music producer lit up with hope. What conditions? First, this cannot become permanent. At the end of 7 days, we tell her the truth no matter what. Agreed. Second, I need my own space here. A separate bedroom. Let's not confuse things. Of course, we have 3 guest suites available. You can choose whichever you prefer. Third, I need to continue my work. I can bring my computer and materials, but I have deadlines to meet. No problem, we have an office that I rarely use. It's all yours. Laura took a deep breath, still not believing what she was about to agree to. And last but most importantly, we need to establish clear boundaries. This is a temporary charade, Thomas. 1 week, and only for Julia's sake. I don't want anyone, especially you, to confuse things. Thomas nodded. Solemn, you have my word. He extended his hand, which Laura shook after a moment of hesitation. 1 week, she reiterated. 1 week, he confirmed. The next morning, Laura returned to the miller's house with 2 large suitcases, one containing clothes and personal items, the other with her work equipment. She was greeted by Regina, who seemed to have been informed of the situation, though her curious gaze revealed more questions than answers. Mr. Miller asked me to accompany you to the blue suite. He said it's the brightest and has a desk that might be useful to you. As she followed the housekeeper through the corridors, Laura observed the house with new eyes. Now that it would be her temporary residence, details she hadn't noticed before stood out. Photographs of Julia at different ages, all without the presence of a maternal figure. The absence of typically feminine objects, the faint scent of musk that seemed to emanate from every corner, probably from Thomas's cologne. The blue suite was in fact stunning, spacious, with a decor that blended classic and contemporary elements. It was dominated by a large king-size bed, covered in Egyptian cotton sheets. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the garden, and a small balcony invited contemplation. The sheets are new. I changed them this morning, Regina informed, opening the curtains. The bathroom is equipped with everything you might need, but if anything is missing, just let me know. Thank you, Regina. Laura placed her suitcases near the closet. Where's Julia? At ballet class, Mr. Miller took her. They'll be back for lunch. Perfect, Laura thought. Time to settle in and, more importantly, to plan how she would handle that unusual situation. After putting away her clothes and setting up a small workspace at the desk, Laura decided to explore the house. She needed to familiarize herself with the environment if she intended to convince Julia that this was, in some way, her home. The main corridor led to a series of rooms, the master suite, presumably Thomas's, Julia's bedroom, decorated in shades of pink and lilac with a castle-shaped bed, a TV room with enormous sofas and a screen that looked more like a cinema, and at the end of the corridor, a double door that opened into a room that immediately captured Laura's attention. It was a home music studio, not as professional as what Thomas probably had at his company, but impressive by domestic standards, and in the center imposing, a shiny black Steinway grand piano. It was his mother's. Laura started at Regina's voice, who had appeared silently behind her. Sorry, I didn't mean to startle you, the housekeeper continued. Mr. Thomas grew up playing that piano. His mother was a classical pianist, Does he still play? Laura asked, remembering Julia's comment about her father not playing anymore. Regina shook her head negatively, not since Miss Camilla left. It's a shame. He had so much talent. A car pulling into the driveway interrupted the conversation. They're here, Regina announced, hurrying towards the kitchen. I'll finish lunch. Laura took a deep breath, feeling a wave of anxiety. The moment of truth had arrived. How would Julia react to seeing her again? How should she herself behave? The front door opened, and Julia's animated voice echoed through the house. And the teacher said I'm the best in class at Grand Plea. That's wonderful, Princess, Thomas replied, in a tone Laura already recognized as his proud dad mode. Deciding there was no reason to delay the inevitable, Laura walked to the entrance hall. Julia, still wearing her pink leotard and ballet slippers, froze when she saw her. For a terrifying second, Laura feared that the girl had realized the charade, that the enchantment of the party had dissipated. Then the child's face lit up with the purest, most genuine smile Laura had ever witnessed. "Mommy," Julia shouted, running towards her. "You stayed!" "You really stayed." Laura knelt to receive the hug, feeling a lump in her throat. The joy of that child was so real, so palpable, that for a brief moment, the designer allowed herself to believe in the fantasy. "Of course I stayed," she replied, stroking the girl's hair. How was ballet? As Julia eagerly recounted her class, Laura's gaze met Thomas's. He watched the scene with a complex expression, gratitude, relief, but also something deeper that she couldn't decipher. At that moment, Laura understood that she had crossed a point of no return. The charade had officially begun, and no matter how much she tried to convince herself that it was just 1 week, that it was for Julia's sake, something inside her whispered that those 7 days would change her life forever. 3 days had passed since Laura officially entered the charade proposed by Thomas. 3 days living under the same roof as the Millers, participating in an elaborate lie that, surprisingly, was becoming easier and easier to play out. The established routine was simple. In the morning, they had breakfast together, like a normal family. Then, while Julia went to school, Laura worked on her projects in the makeshift office. In the afternoon, she participated in the snack ritual when the girl returned, and in the evening, the three of them had dinner together, followed by some family activity, usually a movie or board games. It was a rainy Wednesday, typical of a New York autumn. Laura was focused on a project for a restaurant in the West Village when she heard soft knocks on the door. "Come in," she replied, without taking her eyes off the computer screen. Thomas appeared, holding 2 steaming mugs. "I thought you might need some coffee." "You've been working since early. Thank you." Laura accepted the mug, smelling the comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee. "Regina makes the best coffee I've ever tasted. Actually, I made this one." Thomas smiled a little awkwardly. "Regina went out to do some shopping." Laura raised her eyebrows, surprised. "I didn't know you had culinary skills." "I have my moments." He shrugged, leaning against the edge of the desk. "How's the project going?" "Almost finished. The client is demanding, wants a mix of modernity with elements of a traditional Italian trattoria. It's a delicate balance. I'm sure you'll manage. Julia showed me your drawings. You have a unique eye." Laura felt her cheeks warm slightly at the unexpected compliment. "Speaking of Julia, how is she doing at school?" she asked, changing the subject. "Since I arrived, I've noticed she's more radiant." Thomas's expression softened. "It's true. Her teacher even commented at yesterday's meeting. Said Julia is more participative, more confident." He paused, taking a sip of coffee. "All thanks to you. I didn't do anything but be present." Laura felt a tightness in her chest, remembering that this presence was temporary. Sometimes that's all a child needs. Someone who is there. Thomas looked out the window, thoughtful. "My parents were always very busy. My mother with her concerts, my father with his business. They were present financially, but emotionally absent." It was the first time he had mentioned his own childhood. Laura realized that despite living together for days, she knew very little about Thomas beyond his career and his role as a father. "Is that why the piano in the studio?" "Regina mentioned it was your mother's." Thomas nodded. "My mother was a renowned pianist. She toured Europe, performed in grand theaters. I grew up backstage and in concert halls. Do you play too?" A melancholy smile appeared on Thomas's lips. I used to. I was trained from the age of 5. My mother believed I had the gift, just like her. And why did you stop? Music. He hesitated, choosing his words. Music was always a form of connection for me. With my mother first, then with Camilla. When they left, each in their own way, music became more a painful memory than a refuge. Laura absorbed the confession, better understanding the complexity of the man before her. He wasn't just a successful music producer or a devoted father. He was someone marked by successive abandonments, desperately seeking to build something stable for his daughter. "I'm so sorry," she said, genuinely moved. "Don't be." Thomas smiled, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I found other paths. Music production allows me to be close to art without having to fully expose myself. And Julia, well, she's my biggest reason to keep going." A comfortable silence fell between them, each lost in their own thoughts as the rain beat against the windows. "And you?" Thomas finally asked. "What led you to interior design?" Laura smiled, remembering. "My grandmother was a seamstress. She spent hours creating wonderful dresses, transforming simple fabrics into works of art. I would sit beside her, drawing the designs I imagined." She paused, taking a sip of coffee. "Over time, I realized that my interest wasn't so much in fashion, but in spaces. How colors, textures, and shapes could transform an environment. How they could make someone feel at home." "Home," Thomas repeated, looking around. "You know, ever since you arrived, this house feels more alive, more like home." The comment caught Laura off guard. There was something in the way he looked at her that made her avert her gaze, suddenly conscious of the intimacy that conversation had created between them. "It's just the effect of novelty," she replied, trying to maintain lightness. "Any change in routine brings a sense of renewal." Thomas seemed to want to say something more, but was interrupted by the sound of the front door opening and Julia's animated voice echoing through the house. "I'm home." "Where is everyone?" "Asked in the office, Princess," Thomas replied, standing up. Seconds later, Julia appeared at the door, her hair damp from the rain, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "Guess what?" she exclaimed, running to hug Laura. "The teacher chose my drawing to represent the class at the school exhibition." "That's wonderful, dear." Laura hugged her back, surprised by the naturalness with which the affectionate term escaped her lips. "Which drawing?" "The one of our family." Julia pulled away just enough to open her backpack and take out a folded paper. "Look." The drawing showed 3 figures holding hands, a tall man in a suit, obviously Thomas, a woman with curly hair, clearly inspired by Laura, and a small girl between them. Above, in colorful letters, was written, "My happy family." Laura felt a lump in her throat, unable to speak. The simplicity and purity of the drawing conveyed so much love, so much hope, that it was almost painful to look at it, knowing that everything was based on a lie. "It's beautiful." "Julia," Thomas said, saving Laura from the need to respond. "We'll put it on the fridge, right in the center. What do you think?" "Yes. And then can we make cookies?" Julia asked, skipping. "Anna Caroline said she makes cookies with her mom every Wednesday." Thomas looked at Laura, a silent question in his eyes. "Of course we can," she replied, forcing a smile. "I'll just finish this detail here and join you in the kitchen, okay?" "Aye." Julia clapped her hands. "I'll go get my apron." As soon as the girl left, Thomas turned to Laura. "You don't have to do this if you don't want to. I can explain to her that you're busy." "No, it's okay." Laura closed her laptop. "Actually, I think a break will do me good. Besides..." She hesitated, looking at the door through which Julia had left. "I've never made cookies before." Thomas looked at her, surprised. "Never?" Laura shrugged, a little embarrassed. "My mother wasn't exactly the culinary type. And when I started living alone, well, it always seemed easier to buy them ready-made." A slow smile spread across Thomas's face. "So this will be a first for both of us." "I've never made cookies either. Usually Regina handles that part." The idea of both of them learning together to do something so simple, yet so meaningful for Julia, created a strange sense of complicity between them. As if in some way they were truly building something together, not just performing. "Well, let's go then," Laura said, standing up. "How hard can it be?" "It's just mixing some ingredients and putting them in the oven, right?" Thomas laughed. I guess we're about to find out. In the kitchen, Julia had already separated the ingredients she could reach: flour, sugar, a bag of chocolate chips. She wore a small pink apron with ruffles and had improvised a chef's hat from aluminum foil. The next 2 hours were filled with flour flying through the air, dough sticking to fingers, spontaneous laughter, and surprisingly, perfectly golden cookies emerging from the oven. It wasn't just the sweet scent that permeated the kitchen, but a sense of belonging that none of the three expected to feel. That night, after putting Julia to bed, a task that had naturally become Laura's, the designer found herself wandering through the silent house. Her steps unconsciously led her to the music studio, where the piano remained imposing under the moonlight streaming through the windows. Without turning on the lights, Laura sat on the piano bench, running her fingers lightly over the keys without pressing them. She didn't know how to play, but there was something magnetic about that instrument, as if it held secrets and stories she yearned to know. It's even more beautiful when it produces music. Thomas's voice startled her. He was standing in the doorway, a silhouette against the hallway light. "Sorry, I didn't mean to intrude," Laura murmured, standing up. "You didn't intrude." Thomas entered, turning on only an indirect lamp that bathed the room in a soft, yellowish light. This place should be used, not just admired from a distance. He approached the piano, touching it with a familiarity that revealed years of acquaintance. "Do you miss it?" Laura asked. "Playing?" Thomas considered the question for a moment. "Sometimes. It's like a language you learned in childhood and then forgot. It's still there somewhere, even if you don't use it anymore." "Play something," she asked, almost in a whisper. "Please." Thomas hesitated, his face a mask of contradictory emotions. Then, slowly, he sat on the bench Laura had occupied moments before. His fingers hovered over the keys for an instant, as if relearning the path, and then he began to play, a soft, melancholic melody, but with a beauty that made Laura hold her breath. It wasn't a song she knew. It had the intimate quality of something personal, perhaps even composed by Thomas himself. The music grew in intensity, his hands moving with more confidence, awakening the instrument from its long slumber. Laura watched, fascinated by the transformation on Thomas's face, the usual tension disappearing, replaced by an expression of complete surrender, as if he finally allowed a long-suppressed part of himself to emerge. When the last note echoed in the night silence, Thomas remained motionless, his eyes closed, as if he feared the enchantment would break upon returning to reality. Laura said nothing. Instead, she sat beside him on the bench, their shoulders almost touching. The proximity wasn't just physical. Something invisible yet deeply real had established itself between them in that shared moment. "Was it yours?" she finally asked, her voice little more than a whisper. Thomas opened his eyes, turning to her. "I started composing it when I found out I was going to be a father. I never finished it, and it's beautiful. Thank you." He smiled, a genuine smile that lit up his eyes. "You're the first person to hear it." That confidence, so simple yet so intimate, created a bubble around them, isolating them from the rest of the world. For a brief moment, they weren't a music producer and a designer playing roles in an elaborate charade. They were just Thomas and Laura, two people connected by something they didn't yet dare to name. "It's late," Thomas finally said, breaking the enchantment. "We should rest." Laura nodded, standing up. When they reached the studio door, Thomas lightly touched her arm, stopping her. "Thank you," he said, his intense green eyes under the dim light. "For what?" "For making me remember that not all memories have to be painful." Laura felt a warmth spread through her chest, a mix of joy and apprehension. The line between real and pretense was beginning to blur dangerously, and she wasn't sure if she had the strength to retrace it. That night, lying in bed in the blue suite, Laura stared at the ceiling as the rain continued to fall outside. Only 4 days remained before the charade would end. 4 days before she would have to leave that house, that life that, surprisingly, was beginning to feel less and less like an act and more like a possibility. A possibility that scared her more than she was willing to admit. Julia's school charity event was one of the most anticipated happenings on the institution's calendar. Held annually in one of the most elegant ballrooms in the Upper West Side, it brought together parents, students, and teachers for auctions and performances aimed at raising funds for social projects supported by the school. For the elite families of New York City who attended Arbordale Academy, it was also an opportunity for networking and social exposure. Laura stared at her reflection in the mirror, adjusting the emerald green dress she had bought, especially for the occasion. It had been 5 days since she moved into the Miller's house, 5 days in which the charade had become increasingly real. "You look beautiful." Thomas's voice made her turn. He was standing in the bedroom doorway, elegant in his dark grey suit, his hair carefully combed back. There was something in his gaze that made Laura's heart race. "Thank you. You look very good too," she replied, feeling her cheeks flush. He entered the room, approaching with a small velvet box in his hand. "I brought something for you." To complete the look, Laura opened the box, revealing a delicate emerald necklace. "Thomas, I can't accept this." "Please." He took the necklace from the box. "It's just a loan for the evening. It will perfectly match your dress." Hesitantly, Laura turned back to the mirror, allowing Thomas to place the necklace around her neck. His fingers lightly brushed her skin during the process, sending shivers down her spine. "There." He smiled, meeting her gaze through the mirror. "Perfect." For a moment they remained like that, looking at each other through the reflection, an indefinable tension hanging between them. It was Julia who broke the enchantment, bursting into the room in her pink party dress. "Joey, I'm ready," she announced, twirling to show off her dress. "Wow, Mommy, you look like a princess." Laura smiled, bending down to be at the girl's height. "And you look even prettier, little one. The princess of this family is you." Julia smiled radiantly, hugging Laura tightly before running to her father, who picked her up with ease. "Well, ladies," Thomas said, offering his free arm to Laura, "I think we're ready to impress." The event hall was magnificently decorated with white flowers and soft lights. Elegantly arranged tables surrounded a small dance floor, and in one corner, the children's artworks were displayed, including Julia's happy family drawing. As they entered, several heads turned. The appearance of Thomas Miller with an unknown woman and his daughter, the three looking like the personification of the perfect family, generated an immediate buzz. Thomas, an elegant woman approximately 50 years old, approached. "How wonderful to see you. And this must be—" "Laura Anderson," Thomas introduced, discreetly placing his hand on her back. "Laura, this is Beatrice Carter, the school principal. It's a pleasure to finally meet you," Beatrice said, shaking Laura's hand with enthusiasm. "Julia hasn't stopped talking about you. It's wonderful that you could join us this year." Laura smiled, trying to hide her discomfort. The way Beatrice spoke suggested that she believed the same as Julia, that Laura was the mother who had returned. "The pleasure is mine. Julia speaks wonders of the academy." "Mommy, I want to show you my drawing." Julia interrupted, tugging on Laura's hand. "You two go ahead," Thomas said. "I'll get some drinks." As Julia dragged Laura through the exhibition, proudly introducing her to classmates and other parents as my mum who came back, the designer tried to ignore the growing feeling of guilt. What had started as a temporary lie to protect a child's feelings was transforming into something much bigger, involving an entire community. "Laura Anderson." The female voice calling her name made Laura freeze. Turning slowly, she found the familiar face of Deborah Menzies, an old colleague from design school. "Deborah, what a surprise to find you here," she replied, trying to maintain composure as Julia clung to her hand. "My son studies at Arbordale too." Deborah looked curiously at Julia. "I didn't know you had a daughter." Before Laura could reply, Julia spoke animatedly. "She's my mom. She was traveling, but now she's back to stay with us." Deborah's eyes widened, darting between Laura and Julia. "Oh, really? How interesting." Her gaze then fixed on something behind Laura. "And isn't that Thomas Miller?" "The music producer?" Laura felt her stomach drop as she saw Thomas approach, carrying 2 champagne flutes. "Deborah, this is Thomas." "Thomas, Deborah Menzies, a college colleague." "Nice to meet you," Thomas said, handing a glass to Laura. "Likewise." Deborah's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I'm surprised. Laura never mentioned having a family during our years of study. In fact, I remember her always saying she preferred to focus on her career." An uncomfortable silence fell over the group. Laura could feel Julia's confused gaze and the tension emanating from Thomas. "People change, Deborah," Laura finally replied, forcing a smile. "If you'll excuse us, we need to greet some friends." Moving away quickly, Laura felt Thomas's hand on her back, guiding her to a quieter corner of the ballroom. "Are you okay?" he asked, concern evident on his face. "I am. It's just that—" She hesitated, looking at Julia, who had found some classmates and was now proudly showing her drawing. "This is getting complicated, Thomas. The lies are piling up." He nodded gravely. "I know, but we're almost there. Just 2 more days, as we agreed. Then we'll tell Julia the truth, in a way she can understand." Laura agreed, though a weight settled in her chest. 2 days, 48 hours before it all ended. Before she had to leave not only the house, but also the small family that, against all expectations, she had begun to love. The rest of the night passed in a mix of light conversation, dancing, and the charity auction, where Thomas bid on a painting for an amount that made Laura choke on her champagne. At every moment, however, she couldn't help but notice the curious glances and whispers that followed them. Deborah had clearly spread the news about Laura's newly formed family. When they finally returned home, Julia was already asleep in Thomas's arms. He carried her to her room, while Laura took off her shoes in the living room, feeling the exhaustion of maintaining appearances all night. "She slept like an angel," Thomas said upon returning, loosening his tie. "She didn't even wake up when I changed her into her pajamas." Laura smiled, remembering the girl's endless energy during the event. It was an eventful night for her. Thomas went to the bar and poured 2 glasses of wine, handing one to Laura. "For us too." He sat beside her on the sofa, closer than usual. "You were incredible, you know. The way you handled everything, everyone, including Deborah and her not-so-subtle insinuations." Laura took a sip of wine, feeling the liquid warm her body, especially with her. Thomas smiled. "But don't worry about it. It's just 2 days, remember." 2 days. The phrase hung between them, laden with unspoken meanings. "Thomas, Laura began, unsure how to express the whirlwind of emotions she felt. He gently silenced her, placing a finger over her lips. "We don't need to talk about this now." His voice was low, almost a whisper. "We can just enjoy the moment." Slowly, as if fearing she might pull away, Thomas leaned in and touched Laura's lips with his own. It was a soft, hesitant kiss, more a question than an affirmation. Laura knew she should pull away, that it would complicate things even further. But her body betrayed her mind, and she found herself responding to the kiss, her hands finding their way to Thomas's nape, pulling him closer. The kiss deepened, years of loneliness and barriers crumbling in a single moment of connection. When they finally separated, both breathless, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "That wasn't in the agreement," Laura murmured, though there was no real reproach in her voice. "I know." He smiled, tracing the outline of her face with his fingers. "I think we've crossed many boundaries of the original agreement." They remained like that for a moment in silence, the implications of that kiss hanging between them. It wasn't just a kiss. It was an admission that what had begun as a charade had transformed into something real, something profound and frightening in its intensity. "It's late," Laura finally said, gently pulling away. "We should sleep." Thomas nodded, though reluctance was evident in his eyes. "Can we talk tomorrow?" Yes, tomorrow." Laura stood up, feeling strangely light and heavy at the same time. "Good night, Thomas." "Good night, Laura." In the hallway, on her way to her room, Laura stopped to look at one of the photographs on the wall, one of Julia smiling, probably taken a year prior. She smiled at the image, feeling such genuine love for the girl that it almost hurt. How would she explain it to her? How would she tell a child who had finally found the mother she longed for that it was all just a well-intentioned lie? With these thoughts tormenting her, Laura finally fell asleep, unaware of the storm brewing beyond the walls of the Miller mansion. The next morning, Laura woke up to the insistent sound of her cell phone. She answered, still groggy, without checking the caller ID. "Hello? Laura? Is that you? My God, so it's true." The agitated voice of Paula, her partner at the design studio, fully awakened her. "Paula? What is it? What are you talking about?" "What am I talking about?" "Laura, you're in all the gossip columns this morning. Interior designer revealed as secret wife of music producer Thomas Miller. There are photos of you at last night's event, wearing an emerald necklace that, they say, belonged to his mother. Laura sat up abruptly in bed, her heart pounding. What? That's absurd. Apparently, Deborah Menzies gave an exclusive interview telling how you hid your family for years and now suddenly reappeared in the life of the producer and his daughter. She insinuated that you're using them to get contracts with celebrities. Laura's world seemed to collapse. Jumping out of bed, she ran to grab her tablet and accessed the news sites. There it was, exactly as Paula had described. Photos of her, Thomas, and Julia at the event looking like the perfect family. The emerald necklace shining on her neck, and malicious comments insinuating that she had abandoned her daughter for years, only to return when Thomas became a significant name in the music industry. This can't be happening, she murmured, horrified. Laura, what's going on? Paula's voice was a mix of concern and curiosity. Do you really have a daughter? Why did you never tell us? Paula, I can't. I need to sort this out. I'll call you back. Ending the call, Laura barely had time to process what was happening when her bedroom door burst open. Thomas entered, his face pale, holding a tablet. Did you see? He asked, his voice tense. I just saw. My partner called. He sat down heavily on the edge of the bed, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. This is a nightmare. How did Deborah get this information so quickly? She always had social media contacts. Laura shook her head, incredulous. But this is defamation. They're painting me as a mother who abandoned her daughter. Oh, you're not her mother, said a small, trembling voice from the doorway. Both turned, shocked to find Julia standing there, still in her pajamas, tears streaming down her face. In her hands the tablet she occasionally used for educational games, now displaying one of the sensationalized news stories. Julia. Thomas stood up, moving slowly towards his daughter. You lied to me, the girl cried, recoiling. She's not my mother. You lied. Laura's heart broke at the sight of the pain in Julia's eyes. All the trust, all the love they had built over that week crumbling in seconds. Julia, darling, we can explain, Laura began, but the girl interrupted her with an angry cry. Don't call me that! You're not my mother. I don't want you here anymore. And with that, she turned and ran down the hallway, sobbing. Thomas cast one last desperate look at Laura before following his daughter. Alone in the room, Laura felt the tears she had held back finally overflow. Everything had fallen apart. The lie that began as an act of kindness was now causing precisely the pain it intended to avoid. And in the midst of it all, she found herself confronting a truth she had tried to deny all week. She had fallen in love, not just with Julia, but also with Thomas, with the concept of family that the three of them had briefly personified. And now, she faced the prospect of losing all of it at once. The rain fell mercilessly over New York City, as if the very sky shared the sadness that dwelled in Laura's heart. 3 days had passed since the social media scandal. 3 days since Julia discovered the truth in the worst possible way. 3 days since Laura had returned to her apartment, leaving behind the family that was never truly hers. Sitting at her desk, she stared at the computer screen without truly seeing it. The news had calmed down a bit after Thomas issued an official statement, clarifying that Laura was merely a close family friend and requesting privacy. But the damage was done. Her cell phone rang, displaying Paula's name. It was the 5th time her partner had called that day. Laura hesitated, but finally answered. Hi, Paula. Thank goodness you answered. I'm worried, Larry. You haven't shown up at the studio in days, barely responding to messages like a, sorry, I'm working from home. It was a half-truth. Although she was sitting in front of her computer, she hadn't been able to make progress on any project since she returned. Look, I'm not going to pretend I understand what happened between you and the Millers, but whatever it is, don't let it ruin your career. We have that presentation for the Fig Tree restaurant on Friday, remember? Laura closed her eyes, running a hand over her tired face. I remember. I'll be there. Are you sure? Because I can take over if you're not up to it. I said I'll be there, Paula. Her voice came out harsher than she intended. I'm sorry. I just need some space. All right, just let us know if you need anything, okay? We're all worried. After hanging up, Laura returned to staring at the empty computer screen. She had tried to contact Thomas several times in the first few days, but he only responded with short, formal messages. As for Julia, The pain of imagining the girl's suffering was almost physical. An especially loud thunderclap startled her. The storm was worsening. Laura got up to close the windows better when the doorbell rang. Frowning, she walked to the door. She wasn't expecting visitors, especially with that torrential rain. Upon opening the door, shock paralyzed her. Thomas was there, completely drenched, carrying an equally wet and apparently sleeping Julia in his arms. "Thomas." "What? Please," he interrupted, his voice trembling. She's burning up with fever. She spent all day asking for you, crying. I tried to give her the medicine, but she won't take anything. Says she only wants—" He hesitated, swallowing hard. "She only wants you." Laura stepped away from the door, allowing them to enter. Her protective instinct immediately took over. "Bring her to my bedroom. I'll get some dry towels." Minutes later, Julia was lying on Laura's bed, wrapped in soft towels. The designer gently dried the girl's hair, whose cheeks were red with fever. Her little eyes slowly opened, unfocused at first, until they found the familiar face. "Laura?" she murmured, her voice weak. "You came back?" Laura felt tears sting her eyes. "I'm here, darling." "You're at my apartment. Your dad brought you." Julia extended a trembling hand which Laura held between hers. "You left, like my real mommy." The phrase, so simple and direct, hit Laura like a punch to the stomach. The guilt she had felt in the past few days intensified. It had never been her intention to cause more pain to that child. "I'm so sorry, Julia, truly sorry." Tears flowed freely now. "I never wanted to hurt you." The girl observed her with surprising intensity for someone so young and feverish. "Why did you pretend to be my mom?" "Did Daddy force you?" Laura felt Thomas tense beside her. He had brought a glass of water and some fever medicine. "No, darling. No one forced me." Laura stroked the girl's damp hair. "Your dad just wanted you to be happy on your birthday." "And I wanted to help, but you lied. Yes, we lied. And that was wrong." Laura briefly looked at Thomas before turning back to Julia. "But do you know what wasn't a lie?" "How much I care about you. How much I enjoyed making cookies together, reading stories before bed, seeing your wonderful drawings." Julia's eyes filled with tears. "So why did you leave?" The question hung in the air, laden with so many layers of meaning. Why did she leave when they had clearly become a family? Why repeat the abandonment the girl had already suffered? "Because I thought it was best for you," Laura replied honestly. "I thought that after you found out the truth, you wouldn't want to see me anymore." Julia closed her eyes for a moment, and Laura feared she was getting worse. But when she reopened them, there was a surprising clarity in them. "I was angry. But then—" She looked at her father. "Then Daddy explained that sometimes adults do silly things thinking they're helping, and that you left because you were sad, not because you didn't like me." Thomas placed his hand on Laura's shoulder, a gentle touch that conveyed both support and a silent apology. "He's right," Laura said, her voice choked. "I would never leave you because I don't like you. In fact, Julia—" She took a deep breath. "In fact, I love you. Very much." The confession hung in the air like a delicate bubble, fragile in its honesty. Julia stared at her for a long moment, as if assessing the truth in her words. Then, with a sudden movement that surprised both Laura and Thomas, the girl sat up in bed and threw her arms around the designer's neck. "I love you too," she whispered, clinging to Laura as if fearing she might disappear again. Laura hugged her back, tears flowing freely now. Over Julia's shoulder, her gaze met Thomas's. He too was silently crying, observing the moment with a mixture of emotions that mirrored her own: relief, hope, fear, and something deeper that neither of them had allowed themselves to name. After Julia took her medicine and finally fell asleep, Laura and Thomas retreated to the small living room of the apartment. The rain continued outside, though less intensely. An uncomfortable silence settled between them. "Thank you," Thomas finally said, looking at the cup of coffee Laura had prepared, "for receiving us like this after everything. You don't need to thank me." Laura sat in the armchair opposite him. "How is she?" "Really, I mean." Thomas sighed, the exhaustion evident on his face. "Physically, the doctor said it's just a bad flu. Emotionally—" He shook his head. "It's been difficult days. She barely eats, has nightmares. She keeps asking for you, even when she was still angry." Laura nodded, feeling the guilt weigh on her chest. "I'm so sorry for all this. If I hadn't accepted that absurd proposal from the beginning, "It's my fault, Laura." Thomas interrupted her, placing the glass on the coffee table with more force than he intended. "I created this whole impossible situation. First by lying to Julia about her mother, then by dragging you into our problems. You just wanted to protect her, and I ended up hurting all of us." He looked up, his intense green eyes even in the soft lighting of the room. "Especially you." Laura averted her gaze, feeling her heart race. There was so much to be said between them, so many unresolved emotions hanging in the air. That night, after the event, Thomas began hesitantly. "Before everything fell apart, Thomas, we don't need to—" "Yes, we do." He stood up, approaching to kneel before her. "Laura, look at me." Reluctantly, she met his gaze. What happened that week, what started as a charade, transformed into something real for me. His voice was low, intense. "When you left, I realized it wasn't just Julia who suffered from your absence. I missed you too, desperately." Laura felt the tears return, her vision blurring. "We barely know each other, Thomas. We know enough." He took her hands in his. "I learned more about you in a week than I learned about Camilla in years of marriage. I saw how you are with Julia, how genuinely you care. I saw your talent, your compassion, your strength. I also saw things in you," she admitted, her voice almost a whisper. "Things that scared me because they made me want to stay. They made me imagine possibilities I had never considered before." A hesitant smile appeared on Thomas's lips. "What kind of possibilities?" Laura took a deep breath. Knowing she was on the edge of a precipice, she could retreat, protect her already wounded heart, or she could take a leap of faith. "A family," she replied simply. "Something I never thought I wanted or needed, until I met you two." Thomas brought a hand to her face, gently wiping away a tear with his thumb. "I'm not asking you to be Julia's mother. I'm not asking us to go back to that charade. What are you asking for then?" "I'm asking for a chance for us, to discover together what is real, without lies, without unrealistic expectations. Just us as we are." Laura closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of his hand on her face. There were so many reasons to say no, so many risks, so many possibilities of getting hurt again. But there was also Julia, sleeping in her room, clinging to her, even after the disappointment. And there was Thomas, this complex and vulnerable man who had knelt before her, exposing his heart without guarantees. "It won't be easy," she said, opening her eyes. "Julia is still processing all of this, and so are we, I know." Thomas nodded. "But I think it's worth a try, don't you?" In response, Laura leaned in and touched her lips to his, a soft kiss that carried a promise, not of an immediate happy ending, but of an honest beginning. 3 months later, the rain had given way to the bright sun of a spring Sunday. The garden of the miller's house was decorated with fresh flowers and small lights that would turn on when night fell. A long table covered by a white tablecloth displayed a magnificent 3-tiered cake, flanked by carefully arranged sweets and savories. It was Julia's 2nd birthday that Laura was celebrating, but this one was different. There were no lies now, no charade. Just a genuine celebration of the life of the girl who had captured her heart. Laura was adjusting some of the floral arrangements when she felt small arms wrap around her waist from behind. "Thank you for making my party so beautiful," Julia said, smiling at her. Laura turned, bending down to be at the girl's level. "It's the least I could do for the most special birthday girl in the world." The sound of music began to echo through the garden. It wasn't a recording, but live piano notes. Laura and Julia turned to see Thomas sitting at the piano that had been brought especially for the occasion. The melody was familiar to Laura, the same one he had played that night in the studio months ago. But now it was complete, evolving from a melancholic introduction to a crescendo full of hope. "Daddy finished the song," Julia exclaimed, running to stand beside her father. Laura watched them, feeling a wave of gratitude for how life had changed. In recent months, they had built a different relationship. It wasn't a replacement for the mother Julia had lost, but something new, honest. The girl now called her Laura, though a mommy occasionally slipped out in moments of particular closeness. As for her and Thomas, they were moving slowly. She still maintained her apartment and her independent studio, but spent increasingly more time at the miller's house. The relationship grew naturally, without pressures or unrealistic expectations. Thomas finished the song with a flourish, receiving enthusiastic applause from Julia and an emotional smile from Laura. "This one is for both of you," he said, standing up from the piano. "I finally managed to finish it. It's beautiful, Daddy." Julia hugged his waist. "What do you think?" he asked Laura as he approached with Julia still clinging to him. "I think you should play more often," she replied, affectionately touching his face. "The world deserves to hear your music." Guests began to arrive. Julia's school friends, Thomas's work friends, some of Laura's clients and colleagues. The afternoon unfolded in a joyful and relaxed celebration without the tension of the previous year. There were no secrets now, just the simple truth of three people who had found each other under unusual circumstances. When it was time for the cake, Julia asked Thomas and Laura to stand beside her to help her blow out the candles. As everyone sang "Happy Birthday," Laura felt Thomas's hand find hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. "Make a wish." "Princess," Thomas said when the song ended. Julia closed her eyes tightly, concentrating intensely before blowing out the 7 candles. Applause erupted around them. "What did you wish for?" asked one of her classmates. "I can't tell, or it won't come true," Julia replied wisely. But then, with a mischievous smile, she leaned in and whispered into Laura's ear, "Actually, I think it's already coming true." Laura hugged her, feeling a joy so pure it almost hurt. Later, when the party had ended and Julia had finally fallen asleep, exhausted but happy, Thomas found Laura on the balcony, watching the night sky. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, offering her a glass of wine. "How life turns." She accepted the glass, smiling. "A year ago I was just a lonely designer who sought shelter from the rain in a bakery. And now?" Laura turned to face him, the soft light of the balcony illuminating her face. "Now I'm a slightly less lonely designer who found a family when she least expected it." Thomas smiled, placing his free hand over hers on the balcony railing. "Do you know what Julia told me today before bed?" "What?" "That she no longer cares if you are her biological mother or not. That the important thing is that you chose to stay, even when you could have left." Laura felt tears form, but they were different from those she had shed during the difficult moments months ago. These were tears of pure gratitude. "I choose you both every day," she simply said. Thomas pulled her closer, his eyes fixed on hers. "I know we're still building this slowly, but I need you to know." He took a deep breath. "I love you, Laura, not for the charade we lived, but for the truth we discovered afterwards. I love you too." She smiled through her tears. "For the real person you are, not for the role you played." Under the starry New York City sky, they sealed that confession with a kiss that carried neither the weight of lies nor the despair of goodbyes, but the simple and powerful promise of a love built on real foundations. And as the gentle night wind carried the scent of garden flowers, Laura thought of the little girl asleep upstairs, a child who, in her innocent wisdom, had taught 3 adults a profound lesson about honesty, forgiveness, and the true nature of families. Because in the end, family wasn't defined by blood or temporary agreements. It was built day after day, in the small choices to stay, to love, to begin again. And this new beginning, unlike all others, had the sweet and genuine taste of truth. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Laura, Thomas, and Julia has touched your hearts. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating narratives. Find it by clicking the link on the left. If this story moved you, be sure to subscribe to our channel and like the video. Daily we bring new stories that explore the complexities of life and the bonds that unite us. And you, have you ever experienced a new beginning that transformed your life? Share it with us in the comments. We look forward to reading your stories.